There are so many different couples and characters in classic literature, but are some of these couples not really right for each other? Maybe they're toxic? If so, what makes them toxic? Well, we're here to discuss just that because today we'll be ranking toxic couples in classic literature because Valentine's Day? So, what makes a couple or relationship toxic? Toxic is a word thrown around quite a bit these days. But before we talk about toxic relationships, we have to really understand what it means to be in one. So, what makes a relationship toxic? I think I would define a toxic relationship as a relationship where the people in it and/or the people around them are being harmed from the relationship. This can be purposeful, or they could be oblivious to it. They could still love each other, but unknowingly or otherwise be sabotaging each other's lives. A toxic relationship has to be just that, toxic, harmful, poisonous, etc. So we have to ask ourselves, is this couple poisonous or harmful? Let's find out. Now, this first one is a classic fairy tale. Thanks to pop culture, it's pretty well known, but just to be clear, we are talking about the version written by the Grimm brothers. I know there's a few different versions of this story, most notably a Disney movie, but we're focusing on the version published in 1812 by the Grimm brothers. So the tale starts off with a nameless princess playing with her golden ball in the forest, and it just happens to fall into a deep well. A frog in the well hears her cries and offers to give her her ball back, but only if she agrees to take him back with her to her palace forever. Disgusted by the frog, she lies to him and leaves him behind when she gets her ball back. But he comes back to the palace and demands that she uphold her end of the bargain, and her father orders her to oblige. He eats a meal with them and eventually tries to crawl into the princess's bed because she's making him sleep in a cold corner. But she ends up flinging him against the wall, which somehow breaks the curse, and he turns into a handsome prince. Mesmerized by his beautiful eyes, the princess suddenly doesn't hate him, and the two get married. So these two make the list for a number of reasons. For one, I'd say that they are definitely not very good for each other. The princess is a spoiled brat who despises the prince and calls him ugly multiple times while he's a frog. And again, she literally throws him against the wall. She hates him that much. Until he becomes a prince, and then she's suddenly in love with him. The prince himself is also just kind of icky. Like, he's the same age as her, I believe, but he still insists on sleeping in her bed and getting physically close to her. On top of that, there's a lot of manipulation on his part. One could argue that he was just doing what needed to be done to break this curse, but all of the things that he pressured her into promising him just don't seem very necessary for that. There are some versions, I believe, that soften this a bit. They have these two warm up to each other and actually become friends before he turns back. And rather than literally trying to kill him by throwing him against a wall, the princess gives him a kiss to show her appreciation. But again, we're looking strictly at the original Grimm brothers fairy tale. Now, I mentioned why these two are on the list, but I really want to clarify why they're at the bottom. Yes, these two objectively hate each other, and there is manipulation and violence. But I do acknowledge that this is a fairy tale. When we get into more complex works that we are actually supposed to take more seriously, we can really dissect the relationships. But for this one, since they're both kind of just shallow teenagers, and they're in this romantic tale with suspended disbelief, they are definitely not the worst. But I think they're a good one to start with because of the nasty things that they say to each other. They really do hurt one another up until the very end. If the frog hadn't turned into a prince, it could have gotten much worse. This one may not be as well known, but trust me, they make the cut for sure. So this is definitely a much different story than the previous one. Brave New World is a dystopian novel written by Aldous Huxley and published in 1932. It follows a series of characters living in an incredibly disturbing society where humans are essentially created in labs so that they can be genetically modified to fit the designed hierarchy in that world. All of the less intelligent people are just mindless workers. Slightly more intelligent people have more important jobs, but they aren't clever enough to challenge the system. And the most intelligent people run it. This book is just full of really, really weird, terrifying stuff, but that's what makes it a classic dystopian. It also has a romance between two characters, Lenina and John. Lenina is a vaccination worker at the London hatchery where the babies are created, and John is a strange man who comes to London after growing up in the wilderness, isolated from society. So there are many red flags with these two. Lenina is perfectly happy, like most people in London, living in this dystopian society. Real human connection is discouraged, and people view other people as ways to obtain pleasure or fun. And this is essentially how she views John. She is intrigued and interested in him because he is different. She obsesses over him because she can't have him in the way that she wants. John grew up in the native reservation in New Mexico, and the tribal people living there raised him on traditional values. And like basically any male character that comes into contact with Lenina, he is infatuated with her. But because of his upbringing, he's also disgusted by her, and often blames her for the attraction that he feels towards her. He also even physically harms her when he finds out that his romantic idea of her isn't true. So, yeah, not good. So they definitely want different things out of a relationship, and said relationship, if you can even call it that, harms both of them physically and mentally. John drowns himself in guilt over his desire for Lenina and takes it out both physically and verbally on both Lenina and himself. Lenina, on the other hand, is unknowingly causing him a lot of harm by pushing these shallow views of human relationships. And just the gross way that they obsess over each other is toxic. So it makes sense that the main couple in a play containing all these horrible events would not be very stable. The Tragedy of Macbeth is a famous play written by William Shakespeare. It was written in 1606 following the infamous gunpowder plot in England as a sort of cautionary tale to people willing to betray their monarch for ambitious and/or selfish reasons. The play follows Macbeth, a Scottish general, who encounters 3 witches that tell him that he will one day be king of Scotland. This leads him to, with a lot of encouragement from his wife, Lady Macbeth, take the life of the king and assume the throne himself. But he soon grows more and more paranoid that people will discover what he has done, that they are plotting against him, and this inevitably leads to his downfall. So, how are him and his wife toxic? Well, the Macbeths, if you will, are both very calculating, scheming, and just bad people. Now, this might make one think that they are a good match, but these two have just a horrible relationship. Lady Macbeth is always pushing and manipulating her husband into doing terrible things. She convinces him that taking the throne is a good idea and even walks him through what he should do to make himself seem innocent. And he goes along with it because of his greed. They are always influencing each other to do these despicable deeds, and there's no real foundation of trust there. They bring out the worst in each other, and in the end, this couple just sees everyone around them as some kind of tool, including each other. And that's very toxic, if you ask me. This one you may or may not have heard of. Samson appears in the book of Judges in the Old Testament of the Bible. Basically, Judges is the book describing how the Israelites lived in the new land before they had a king. Certain areas were governed by judges, one of which being Samson. So, while the previous couples did hurt each other, there was at least some level of affection there. The Frog Prince and Princess ended up getting married. Lenina and John at least had some fondness between each other, and Macbeth and Lady Macbeth schemed together. They weren't plotting to harm each other behind each other's back. But Delilah and Samson do this. In the book of Judges, Samson was blessed by God to be born with incredible strength, making him a powerful judge of Israel. But there's a catch. If he cuts his hair, he'll be as strong as any other normal man. Delilah is a Philistine, one of Israel's worst enemies. Samson falls in love with her, and the Philistines convince Delilah to seduce him and find out what his weakness is so that they can get rid of a powerful enemy. After Samson lies to her 3 times, he finally breaks and tells her the truth. She shaves off all his hair in his sleep, and the Philistines capture and enslave him. They display him in front of a crowd in triumph, and Samson calls on God for vengeance. The entire temple is destroyed, including Samson. These two are just so bad for each other. Yes, it's stated that Samson loves Delilah, but it feels very shallow because it seems, at least to me, more of an infatuation. He is also apparently oblivious to the fact that she might not want to be with him because he's her enemy and he's killed hundreds of her people. When she asks him about his weaknesses, even if it's underhanded and manipulative, he still lies to her face, and in the end he ends up telling her the truth purely out of annoyance because she keeps nagging him. There's clearly not any sincerity there on his part. Delilah seems to have no affection for him as well. She tries time and time again to betray him. She seduces him and lies to him, and her actions literally result in his humiliation and demise. Samson's ignorance also seems to fuel this hatred that she has for him, and she just brings out all his worst qualities by manipulating him like this. They are not just simply negative influences on each other, they influence each other to harm one another, and that is extremely toxic. Now, this one is definitely number 1 in my book. These two are both horrible people. They hurt or take the lives of anyone who gets in their way, and they eventually grow such a disdain for one another that they want to do just that to each other. Jason and Medea, everyone. Now, some of you may recognize Jason as the hero from Greek mythology who captured the Golden Fleece, but Medea is not as well known. The Argonautica, or Jason and the Argonauts by Apollonius of Rhodes, follows the Greek hero Jason and his crew as they search for the legendary Golden Fleece, so that he can overthrow his uncle Peleus and become king of Thessaly. He meets his future wife Medea, a powerful sorceress and princess of the island where the Golden Fleece is, who helps him get the Golden Fleece. Together they journey back to Thessaly and kill Peleus. But this results in them being banished from Thessaly to Corinth. They do live in Corinth happily married for a while, and they have 2 kids, until Jason, hungry for power, becomes engaged to the Corinthian princess. When Medea flips out over this, she is banished from Corinth, and Jason attempts to toss her and his children aside. Medea then gets her revenge by gruesomely killing Jason's fiancée and both her children. Yikes. So with that very long summary out of the way, I think you can already tell how toxic these two are. But in the spirit of true love, I'll break it down for you. For one, Medea and Jason have a very problematic start. Medea only loved and helped Jason because the goddess Hera, who favored Jason, willed her to, and one could argue that Jason kind of took advantage of this situation. On top of that, they are always conspiring heinous crimes that result in unnecessary deaths, one of which including Medea's own brother. Medea only flips out later because Jason is doing it to her. They ruin the lives of those around them and just feed the worst aspects of each other. Medea takes the lives of people important to not only Jason, but also herself, just to spite him. On top of that, these two grow such a deep contempt for one another. They were bad enough when they loved each other and did horrible things to their enemies, but they are far worse when they hate each other. Jason let his greed and ambition consume him, and he put his family in complete disregard. He convinced himself to hate Medea because she was supposedly being ridiculous and overreacting. He took no responsibility for his actions, and his selfish choices hurt both Medea and the people closest to him. Medea's love, on the other hand, was very fragile. Jason was on a pedestal until he betrayed her. Then her hatred was just as strong, if not stronger, than her love for him. It drove her to commit appalling acts to innocent people, some of which she even loved herself. But her awful relationship with Jason just fueled every terrible thing she did, so much so that it completely crippled her morality. This is extremely poisonous, harmful, and toxic. The toxicity of relationships is a popular topic nowadays, and even something as modern a term as toxic can be applied to classic literature. Do you agree? Would you have ordered any of these couples differently or picked any different ones? Do you think Medea and Jason would have gotten over the whole murder thing with a little therapy? We'd love to hear your thoughts, so make sure to comment and subscribe, and happy Valentine's Day.